Hello everybody, what's up? You're listening to Aruba Presents I Was Just Wondering Tom Salmon, the podcast that dives into music, film and games and everything else in between. My guests on this week's episode are Noel Smyth and Fergus Grady, who directed and produced their debut documentary film Camino Skies, which tells the story of 6 strangers walking the 800-kilometre Camino Santiago to overcome personal trauma and tragedy. We jumped into Noel and Fergus's experience casting the 6 strangers walking the Camino, capturing their dramatic ups and downs along the trail, and the technical and physical challenges they faced making their first award-winning documentary film. So, if you're running, stuck in a traffic jam, or sitting behind a desk at work, hope you enjoy my interview with Noel and Fergus. Can you introduce yourselves to the listeners? Who are you and what kind of film and television work do you do?
My name's Noel Smyth. I'm a director for Camino Skies. I was the co-director, co-producer and cinematographer. I make observational documentaries.
I'm Fergus Grady. I grew up in New Zealand. I reside in Melbourne. I've been working in the film industry for 15 years, starting out as a production sound practitioner and working my way up into distribution, and now as a producer and film director.
Okay, so Camino Skies is your debut documentary film, which is released on the 8th of May in the UK on Curzon Home Cinema and other streaming platforms. So what's the film about and why did you want to make it?
The film is about life, love and loss, and it's set against the backdrop of the Camino de Santiago. So we followed 6 New Zealanders and Australians all dealing with grief in one way or another as they undertook the Camino de Santiago. And I guess going into it, there's all sorts of historical and religious background about the Camino de Santiago, but we were most interested in the stories of people and why they do it. And I first heard of the Camino about 10 years ago when my wife walked it, and at that point she'd been going through a lot in her life, and so she's always told these stories about these incredible moments on the Camino and how much it changed her, and then from there I sort of hadn't really thought about it at all, and then Fergus one day said, what do you think about doing a film on the Camino? And so we started looking into it, and the more we researched it, we just realized that it was an incredible opportunity to find some really amazing stories, people-driven stories, and thousands of people walk it every year, and continue to go back. Many people do it more than once and make it a regular thing, and it's sort of that question of what draws people to do something like that, where it is quite challenging physically and mentally, and you're sharing bunk accommodation with complete strangers, and it's definitely not luxurious. So the question was always what draws people to do this.
And what for you, Fergus, was the sort of driving force for you to sort of get involved with this project?
I guess Noel and I had spent a number of years developing projects and trying to get funding and finance from local government and private investment. And we got to the point where we had an idea and we had the resources in terms of our own skill set. Noel as a cinematographer and me as a sound recordist, and sharing co-directed and co-producing duties, we knew we could at least get this to a rough cut where we could bring in some expertise. And we just booked flights to Spain and found 6 subjects, and off we went.
I mean, I'll confess, I hadn't heard of the Camino Santiago before. I mean, is it a particularly well-known walk/trek in New Zealand and Australia?
Per capita, New Zealand and Australia would have some of the most, the highest pilgrims out of any country in the world. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's one, a physical challenge. So for most Kiwis and Aussies, they like the outdoors and they like hiking. But I also think because Spain is exactly the opposite end of the world from New Zealand, it is a challenge to go over there for 40 days and complete the whole thing at once. Whereas a lot of the Brits and the Irish that we met made attempt to do the Camino over 7 or 8 years or over a number of bank holidays and do it that way. So for a lot of the Kiwis and Aussies, they spend, a month and a half, whereas a lot of the Europeans we met will break it up and do different sections over a number of years.
For you, were there any sort of films you looked to as inspiration before you set out making your own documentary on the subject?
I think we tried to stay away from, I guess, over-researching both the subject and the reference, because I think over researching can kind of lead to, you putting your own thoughts and ideas onto the subjects instead of just following them and see where it leads. And same goes for the Camino. Like we're by no means experts on the Camino. Partly because we didn't want to over research it. We didn't want it to become a tourist film because we knew this was a famous thing and we need to get that. It was more about, if it's important to our subjects, we'll film it or we'll be there. But if not, it's irrelevant to their stories. And so I didn't really have any reference for the film. Fergus, I don't know, did you?
Well, the thing was, Tom, we met majority of our subjects in Spain. So we didn't actually get to do any camera tests with them before we left. So we also didn't really have a form or a concept in mind. We knew it would be a journey, and we didn't know if it would be a complete journey, whether everyone would finish it. And we were just open to any narrative that came across our path. And the fly-on-the-wall observational style is truly how it was. I mean, we followed either 2 or 3 subjects every day as they walked the 20 to 25 kilometres, and we just basically rolled up on everything. So at the end of it, when we got back to Australia, we had hundreds of hours of footage, and we really worked out the structure and the narrative in the edit.
And the film's opening opens on Sue Morris. It's a 70-year-old divorcee who's got scoliosis, and she's in a state of near collapse in a hostel. And I just wondered, when you captured that very raw and human moment, were you like, okay, when you saw that, this is our opening?
No, I think at that point when we captured stuff, things would just happen, and we knew it would be a key scene, absolutely, but we didn't know, we weren't thinking about the edit at that point in it. And it wasn't until the edit when we started playing around with different ideas, and we had an incredible editor, Ramon Watkins, who helped us, was integral to the film, and just had so many great ideas. He comes from a writing background, and so he really helped us make the film what it was.
I also captured a number of breakdowns of Sue's breakdown particularly, and when we were filming them, they were all just obstacles in her journey that we were willing her and hoping that she would be able to push through. So the whole 40 or 37 days walking with Sue was a test after test for her. So at the time, in the opening scene, it was just one test, and we were hoping that she would be able to push through, and she did. She was up early the next day, and a couple of interviews, which are sort of non-linear, sort of represent the strength that Sue has mentally, and obviously pushing through with her scoliosis. So
the thing about sort of Sue and watching the documentary, she's in excruciating agony, and she suffers from arthritis as well, and her hands are sort of like swelling up. I mean, sort of filming her, because she's very, from my perspective, watching the documentary, she was very good at dealing and managing with that really like chronic sort of like pain. But from your experience, I mean, how tough was it to watch her go sort of like through that, to be with her to sort of for sort of 30 or 40 or so days?
Yeah, it was extremely tough. And you know, we can only show so much of it in the film, but essentially that was Sue every day, every morning. She'd wake up in pain, and it was just a case of getting outside and on the road and start walking and warm up, but it was amazing and painful. I think Fergus says it at the start off camera in the film, but it's painful watching you in pain, Sue. And it was every single day we'd see it, but also so inspirational because she would get up and again and just keep going.
And just following on from that question, so you follow 6 strangers from New Zealand who are walking the Camino de Santiago. How did you meet them, and how hard was it to convince them to be a part of the documentary?
Well, there were 4 Kiwis. So we've got the 2 gentlemen, Mark and Terry, who are related through Mark's wife and Terry's daughter. And so they came about through an article that Terry had been interviewed for about Terry's granddaughter, so Mark's stepdaughter, who passed away, unfortunately. So they were known to me, and I reached out to them. Julie from Christchurch in New Zealand was all signed up to go on a tour, or at least booked through a tour company, where the tour guide had mentioned her recent loss, not to give away too many spoilers. So she was a miraculous addition to the team and came in quite late. And Cheryl, who's South African-born Kiwi, was also an addition quite late in the piece. But the Australian women, Claude and Sue, are sort of prominent figures in the Australian Camino community. So they moderate the Facebook page and organise meetup groups in the cities that they live in, Perth and Brisbane. So, they all came together from different parts of Australia and New Zealand, and there was a bit of an Anzac spirit. You know, the camaraderie and the rivalry was quite fun, especially with the boys. And we see that humour, hopefully, if your audience enjoy it. We certainly enjoyed walking with them.
I was just thinking on a practical level, I mean, how, when you flew over there and you had these sort of 6 sort of subjects, I mean, how did you get the film insured? Because as you sort of mentioned before, it wasn't a given that any of these people that you were following would actually make it to the end.
Yeah, no, that's right. We were prepared that people were going to drop out, and I guess that if that had have happened, that would have just been a part of their story. So I guess it's about being flexible enough to let go of your own ideas of, well, this is the ending we want, which, you know, going into it, our ending was we wanted to see everyone arrive together, but and then reality comes along and things change. And I think as documentary filmmakers, you just have to be prepared for that to change and just go with whatever happens and be really flexible.
Sort of thinking about that, in terms of you followed sort of Sue, Mark and Terry and Claudia and Julie and Cheryl pretty sort of closely as they walked along. I mean, do you think walking for them was the best medicine in terms of what they were going through? I
think they intended to walk through their issues. I'm not sure in terms of the medicine being the walking or the remedy being the finishing of the Camino Frances, which is the French way which we walked.
Right.
And I'm sure some of them had crises of their own along the way, which were sort of added to their own inner turmoil. But I think what they all got out of it was a collective experience that was shared as an achievement, that they were all able to sort of almost walk in together. We see the 4, well, not to spoil it, but, you know, we all see them arrive into Santiago. But the main thing for them was that they were able to celebrate their achievements together. And there were some moments in the film which you can laugh at, but it was quite tense at times. But I think ultimately, when we catch up on Facebook or Skype, it's great. Everyone can joke around, but there's a really sense of, a team, a collective achievement that we all were able to look back on as fond memories.
I think going into it, and one of the reasons we thought the Camino would be such an incredible place to find and show and tell really interesting stories was because walking. I totally believe that walking has incredible healing. Gives incredible benefits, and whether that's the physical aspect of it or more the meditative aspect of it, where people, because a lot of the time you're just walking on your own. Like there's different sections of the Camino that get quite busy, but a lot of the days people would just be on their own, in their own head, in their own thoughts, working through that. And then you might come across another person or another group, and you can go from complete strangers to best of friends in the next hour because you've just spent an incredible hour just bonding over shared stories and shared experience. And I think there is something very healing about walking.
How did you, you do see it in the documentary film, but how, from your perspective, did you, from when they started to when they finished, how did you see this sort of subjects sort of change sort of physically and mentally as you sort of filmed them?
I think for the veterans, so Sue, Terry and Claude had walked it multiple times. It was about the group and the dynamic of the group and them leading us, because it was Noel and I, our first time. But for someone like Julie, who had, brought, the physical memory of her loved ones as well as the mental pain, to watch her release the grief that she'd been carrying in various parts of the Camino, and then obviously in the last scene, it was quite interesting because she's such a determined, driven woman, and is a clinical psychologist in her job. To watch her deal with grief and to walk through grief was quite, we didn't really know when she was going to break down, but it wasn't really until 3/4 through or at the end that she was able to let go a little bit. Obviously you can't let go of grief, but she let go certainly about 3/4 through in one of the scenes that we see.
And I think everybody changed in very different ways over the course of the journey. Like Mark was definitely not a religious man, but there's a moment in the film where he has quite a spiritual moment, or a couple of moments actually. So I think for Mark, came away from the walk with some definitely some new ideas around religion that he didn't have before, and for Sue as well. Like there was the physical aspect and the achievement of getting through every day, but also, and not to give away maybe a spoiler alert, but she had a lot of emotional baggage that maybe she'd been holding on to, and towards the end of the film she is able to feel comfortable enough to let that go.
And there are lighter moments in the documentary. There's a few moments where you captured the walkers playing on swings like drunk teenagers, and I just wondered what you thought that says about sort of aging and the playfulness of the human spirit as well.
I don't think it changes at all. I think different age groups see other age groups differently. Like you think that I'm nothing like them or they're nothing like me, but then you see moments like that and you realize that could be children on a swing, or that could be drunk teenagers on a swing, or whatever. And so I love that's one of my favorite moments in the film, and I love those moments because it's those sort of moments that you just see that connection amongst humanity.
Yeah, I think we all behaved like children at some point in the walk, whether it was throwing out toys or after a few drinks, jumping on the swing. So We definitely got to know each other very well.
We also just sort of touched on it briefly, but I just wanted to sort of like jump into, there's one point where Mark is struggling to walk up a rocky hillside in the pouring rain, and this dog shows up and it spurs him on to keep going. And he later says that he feels the dog was sent from his daughter Maddie, who sadly sort of passed away, and feels like this was a moment from God. And from your experience, how powerful is attaching a specific meaning to an event in the grieving process?
Yeah, I can't speak to how important it is, but I definitely think it's a common thing, and even Julie says it in the film. And people working their way through grief often find little symbolism in different things, and so Mark had this moment with this stray dog that was kind of pushing him on, and I know Julie would see heartstones and butterflies everywhere, and they were all sort of memories from people that they'd lost, and so so I think people do definitely find symbolism where they need it.
And I think Mark teetered on, between spirituality and religion. I think it was the particular thing you talk about, Tom, is quite profound, and it actually touched everyone that day. I'm not saying it was just Mark who had that solo experience. I mean, that dog, the reason why we were able to capture that dog was because it followed Mark, and then it followed Noel as he came in shortly after Mark. So it's quite an emotional scene because we had the same experience with the dog, and we were just able to luckily marry Mark's voiceover with the vision of the dog at the top of the rocky climb.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah, that's really interesting.
We should expand on that. Yeah, we didn't actually capture that all at the same time as Mark. I was maybe a couple of hours behind Mark at that point, and came across the same dog. And I just wanted to film it because it was such just a beautiful moment with the rain and the bad weather, and here's this stray dog that was sort of doing circles around me, and didn't know how it was. Didn't know how it would be used in the film, but then later when we got into the edit, or later on when Mark was telling us this story about this dog, we clicked. It was the same dog, and just amazing, moments like that where you capture stuff by chance and it all comes together.
And just sort of touching upon that in terms of your own sort of like personal growth in the documentary, I just wondered when you were doing the sort of 40 days, because it was the first time walking Camino, was there any particular sort of like things in the back of your mind that you were sort of like walking through yourself to a similar or lesser degree than what the subjects were kind of going through? Was there anything that came up for you that you had a chance to deal with, should we say?
It was really hard for us, I think, because we were such a small crew doing everything ourselves. Like our days were just non-stop work, basically. So we didn't. I think we'd need to do the Camino ourselves again to get that Camino experience, because I think we'd wake up before sunrise and we'd be out filming in the nice light as everyone walked off, and then we'd follow people all through the day, and then we'd get in the afternoon and continue filming people, and then eventually start copying footage over to hard drives, and our days wouldn't wrap up until about 12, and then we'd wake up again and do it all over again every day for 40 days. So I don't know if we got the true Camino experience. I don't know, Fergus, did you work?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, and like to deflect to the subjects on this question. I guess as first-time filmmakers, we put pressure on ourselves, but the main pressure for me was the financial commitment, having sort of spent 4 years raising the finance to self-fund the film. You obviously don't want it just to be seen by friends and family. You want it to be seen by as many people as possible. So for us as filmmakers, but also as financiers in the film, there was the financial pressure. But thinking about it now and reflecting on the experience, it was fantastic. It was the best working holiday you could have, right? I mean, you have best friends like Noel and I are, and then you have new friends like the six on camera, and then we were very lucky to have our production manager Phoebe Curran join us from the UK. So she came in fresh and she walked with us the whole way. I even left her with the sound gear. I had to duck off for another work trip to France for a week and left the guys to man everything as a 2-person crew for about 8 days. So yeah, there was some interesting times, and I'm sure Noel and Phoebe worked their asses off in that week that I was away.
Each day, was there a particular amount of filming that you needed to get done in terms of, did you have like a sort of quota, like, right, today we need to get like sort of 8 hours of footage?
No, there wasn't a quota or anything. I think going into it, we had a lot of conversations around what's the best way to capture a story like this, where we're following 6 different people along a moving journey, and there were just so many logistical issues around it. And at different points we were talking about, well, do we put a microphone on everyone and just let it roll all day long? Because a big thing that we wanted to capture was those little conversations, throwaway conversations that people have when they're walking, that eventually open up into really intimate, deep conversations and musings on life. And so we were interested in capturing that. And in the end, we decided, no, we'll just mic them up, mic up 1 or 2 people at a time, and we'd decide who that was the night before, and then set out with them in the morning. And I'd be filming, Fergus would be doing sound, and we'd both chime in with questions if we had questions, or a lot of it was just a general conversation. And then as the morning wore on, I'd sort of stop to film some B-roll or a little detail or landscape or whatever it might be, and Fergus and whoever we were following would continue walking, and so I'd double time to kind of catch up, and then I'd drop back again and catch up, and eventually I'd drop behind altogether and just do my own thing, and eventually maybe come across somebody else and film them and mic them up and film them. But as far as a quota, we didn't have a set thing. It was just, we wanted to film whatever was interesting, and so if we thought that somebody was starting to chat about something interesting, we'd essentially just roll up and see where it went. And then the whole time I'd be gathering B-roll around that location and that area, just in case we needed it to, like, just in case they did say something interesting and we wanted to build a scene around that dialogue.
The film has moments of sort of like talking heads in there as well, where you will sort of Stu will be sort of sat down and Julie will be sort of sat down and sort of like talking. And was that filmed on the trail as they were kind of walking, or was that kind of positioned at the end to get those sort of moments of introspection from them? No,
that was, we did that all the way through at different points, and maybe at definitely at points where if we weren't with somebody to see it on camera and we wanted to hear about it, we'd sit them down at the albergue and get them to talk about it. Or even early on, I think we did some initial interviews towards the start of the Camino, and then maybe midway, and then towards the end we did some more. But it was there was nothing really set in stone for this film. It was sort of just what we thought was needed at the time, and who was going through something that was really raw that day, and could we get them on camera talking about it.
And I had like a question in terms of the cinematography. There are some lovely sort of like landscapes, aerial landscapes in the film. Is that something you shot with a drone? And if you did, is that something you've done before?
I did, and no, I hadn't used a drone before. I think we got the drone maybe 2 weeks before setting off, and so I'd taken it out on a quick trip to play with it. But otherwise, yeah, we jumped into it, and we didn't have a lot of gear, but we definitely had more gear than you'd like to hike with over 40 days. So, my camera itself was about 6 kilos, and the backpack was about 16 or 17 kilos. And then Phoebe and Fergus had their own packs of gear and chargers and whatnot. But yeah, the drone stuff though was, I very much thought it was really important to the film to get that stuff, just because the camera work following people throughout it was such a physical job that the camera work is very much handheld and has a bit of a shake to it, which we wanted because it brings that energy to a scene, but then the film just needed those moments of taking a step back, to see those aerial views and have a breather and get your bearings again on the sort of landscapes we were in.
And then Fergus, I had a question about sort of being the sound recordist on location. I mean, what were some of the challenges that you sort of faced in terms of just recording people on a sort of daily basis?
Coming back to your earlier question about ratio or quota, the great thing about digital filmmaking compared to say 20 years ago is that we were able to roll up on everything. It may have created problems later on in the edit, but we use this process of basically rolling up on hundreds of hours of audio conversations. So each subject had a lav or a lapel mic attached to their clothing, and I would just be there walking with them, asking as many questions as I can think of at the time. And in the end, we were able to transcribe a lot of the audio interviews through an automated service. So in the end, we just had hundreds of pages of script. And then in the edit, if we wanted to control F or find, grief or depression or trauma, we could go back to that spot in the audio script and find that sound bite. So it was really interesting. As long as the audio was clean, we had hundreds of hours of audio sound bites on hand to jump into the edit. And what we ended up doing was, with a lot of Noel's cinematography, we were able to cut away and use the lovely kind of landscape shots, as well as bring in this kind of overlay of audio to try and marry them together. So we were quite we were kind of traditional, or we were sort of non-linear, and where we jumped all over the place in the edit. And maybe that's one of the criticisms of the film, is we're not necessarily in a chronological order of this is day 1, this is day 20, or this is day 37, which is the last day. We just jumped all over the place. But from a story perspective, it made more sense to follow the journey of the characters rather than the chronological order of the walk.
You had a nightmare of a time miking up everyone, just because of the clothing, the type of clothing everyone wears, tracking. Just so much rustle and it's just terrible for sound. But it all came up great.
Sound editors as well. We had great post-production sound team, including some of the best technicians in New Zealand who have worked on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So we were super lucky to get some government support at the end of the process and do our post-production in New Zealand.
Just jumping back to the point you made about in terms of it not being sort of like chronological, that's an interesting point, because it's not something that I'd really considered when I was watching it. But I guess in terms of the documentaries you watch now, they do tend to be chronological or work to a very sort of like prescribed sort of like format. But I guess when I was actually watching the documentary the first time, me personally watching it, I wasn't particularly aware that it was sort of jumping backwards and forwards. It was more, it was like you're definitely watching a journey rather than what I'm trying to say, that of people, rather than they're really working to a particular goal, which they are, of course, but it seems a bit more, as you say, sort of observational in that way, a bit more naturalistic.
You know, we didn't totally mix up everything. Like we had our key points, but you know, in the edit when we were discussing, we were having conversations around, well, you know, do we need to make it chronological? Do we need to see this town on this day and then this town on this day? And yeah, in the end, we decided no. For the point of the story, it's the chronology of it's not important, or like the specifics of it, which all the Camino, you know, there's some Camino people that saw the film and criticized that because they wanted to see this specific town at that point. But for us, it was very much more about being true to that emotional arc of all our characters that they were going through.
What I was thinking also about this particular journey is like sort of like dealing with like the local businesses and locals who actually work and make their living off the Camino de Santiago. I mean, you can make like a spin-off documentary about just them alone, really, of just these people, like I guess like walking past them on a continuous sort of like basis.
Yeah, and I feel deeply saddened by what's happened, you know, with Spain having one of the worst infection rates in the world per capita, and what the impacts are going to be for the next 2 years, maybe even longer, for the Camino. I mean, some of these small little towns, Viana comes to mind, you know, I think will really be decimated by the COVID-19 crisis. And I guess we hope that they can recover, because they're almost 100% reliant on tourism and Camino tourism.
What I was thinking about in terms of the sort of tourist trade or walkers, for a better sort of word for them, and the interaction between them, it seemed from what you filmed, it seemed sort of like very sort of like genuine, and they seemed very happy to actually have those people like there, and also like somewhat.
Everyone we came across was just incredibly friendly and really welcoming, and I guess that is their day to day. They're talking to different pilgrims coming through every single day, and a lot of the towns were smaller than I was expecting. I found I don't know what I was expecting, but there were definitely towns where I'd sort of look around and think, where is everyone? But just because they were so small, they were so quiet, but the locals that were there were incredibly friendly and really, really welcoming and genuine.
And I just wanted to sort of touch a little bit on the film's composer, Tom. I'm going to get his name wrong. McLeod. Yeah, sorry. The film's composer Tom McLeod. What kind of sort of like music cues did you have in mind for the film, and how was it working with Tom?
Well, Tom, unfortunately for us, fortunately for the film, we were able to have our world premiere in the US, and it was quite a late acceptance, and then a lot of the government finance came in quite late,
right,
which only gave us 2 weeks and a limited budget to brief Tom on what we needed. We asked for about 15 minutes, and he delivered the most incredible 15 minutes we could hope for. But in the meantime, we kind of had stretched the budget, so we ended up sourcing some library tracks. But with Tom, there were 4 key scenes that he was involved with, and as I said, for him to turn it around in 2 weeks with session musicians and late nights and everything coming together at the last minute was incredible. Noel might be able to speak more about it. It was kind of miraculous, wasn't it, Noel?
Yeah, I was amazed that Tom could pull it all together so quickly, and we were so lucky with that because, you know, we had temp tracks in there during the edit, where, you know, it sort of spoke to the tone we wanted, and a lot of it was string driven, which Tom just does beautifully, but then the plan was always to get a composer to go back through and rescore the entire thing.
Right.
Which, you know, because of the timing and the budget, we couldn't quite do that at the end, but to have Tom to be able to at least go through and write some scores for a couple of key themes and moments, I thought just really made the film. So in the end, we had, about 15 minutes composition from Tom and stock music, and then there were a couple of licensed tracks, more famous tracks.
And just in terms of funding, how much did you get from, I believe was it Screen New Zealand that you managed to get some money from to sort of help you with your documentary?
We got the completion funding through the New Zealand Film Commission. They screened the film at rough cut, very rough, temp soundtrack, and no colour grading, no sound editing, and luckily they loved the film and could see a pathway to audience, and and we were kind of fortunate enough with the distributor Limelight's kind of expertise. It ended up being the second highest grossing documentary in New Zealand last year, and we won a few awards, and it was a big success for the New Zealand Film Commission to put their brand and their support behind us, and just as of yesterday, they were in a position to support our next film from a development standpoint. So we're very much in business with the New Zealand Film Commission, and they've been great.
And just sort of looking back on the whole experience of making Camino Skies, what was the biggest lesson that you learned that you'll take forward from this documentary into your next project?
You know, just finding someone to work with to bring a project to life. I think Fergus and I had worked on a couple of little things together, but before this, I'd often just try and go it alone and do my own thing. And, you know, you come into something like a feature documentary, and it's just such a marathon of work, and there's just so many ups and downs. And I forgot to mention before that, like, probably my Camino was making the film. Like, a lot of the same emotions that you get doing the Camino, I got out of finishing the film. But I'd say my biggest takeaway was just to keep collaborating with people and not try and not get stuck in your own little bubble doing it yourself.
And I guess for me it was just taking it from Noel, just being able to get through such an arduous production schedule, plus when we got into the Newport Beach Film Festival in America, it was really a sprint. What started off as sort of a slow marathon turned into a frantic sprint at the end, and Noel was going through a lot of personal issues with his father-in-law passing away, and also the birth of his daughter, his first child. So I was working remotely in New Zealand, finishing the film. Noel was dialing in, but we were able to celebrate at the end of the journey with Julie in America, with the world premiere, and then also just the joys of being able to share it with not only Australians and New Zealanders, but now in the UK on the 8th of May. That is the most rewarding thing for me, is being able to share the film with as many people as possible.
And I just have one final question for you both. What's your dream project if money and time wasn't an issue?
Good question. I don't know if there's any one particular subject, but honestly, a project like Camino Skies has got to be up there. Like, for me, having a camera and walking somewhere new every single day, traveling, was that is a dream in itself. And then to be able to tag along and follow people's stories and to have their trust and have them opening up to camera is, it doesn't often happen. And so if more projects come up like that, I'll be quite happy.
I'm excited by how long-form documentary, not just feature, but episodic. We've seen the OJ series and then the Michael Jackson series, and now I'm completely hooked on The Last Dance, the Chicago Bulls series. I mean, I think that's brilliant that audiences can binge long-form documentary. So as an avid sports fan and New Zealand kind of rugby and cricket fan, I'd love to make some retrospective historical long-form series that will, we were able to, or unarchive, kind of, followed through from an early inception to the final result would be a dream project for me. But I just think working with people like the 6 guys that we worked with on Camino Skies is such a joy. And we're still, sending memes and coronavirus stupidity back and forth. So we're still a tight unit, and that's one of the biggest rewards for me, for sure.
So there you have it. I had a great time chatting with Noel and Fergus, and you can watch Camino Skies on Curzon Home Cinema right now. Just hit the link in the description box below. And don't forget to check out more great content on aruba.com, from film reviews, video game hot takes and top 10 videos. And why not sign up and become a member and share your passion for all things entertainment on aruba.com today. And you can like and subscribe to I Was Just Wondering with Tom Salmon on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify and YouTube, and maybe leave a comment and a review if you like. And you can support the podcast on Subscribestar at www.subscribestar.com/I Was Just Wondering with Tom Salmon right now. Thank you so much for listening to I Was Just Wondering with Tom Salmon. I've been Tom, and I'll catch up with you next episode.